Okay, we'll call this meeting to order of the Compensation Board, Tillamook County Compensation Board. First thing on the agenda is consideration of a designating a board chair. The date is April 30th, 2025 at 12 p.m.
Mr. Chair, I think you should remain in the position that you've been in through this entire process. I don't see why we'd change now.
I second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, meeting purpose. I guess we go to Rachel for this.
Yeah. So good afternoon. Glad to be with you here today. There's several things that I'd like to accomplish today. First, I think this meeting is a little different than we've done in the past with the compensation board, so I'd kind of like to look at it as a bit of a reset. I've done extensive research and compiled a ton of information for you, which I've sent to you in your packet. And I would largely like to cite from that because a lot of it is statutory or very specific procedures that I don't want to get lost in translation. So I'll go through that, what was in your packet. I'll pause along the way at different points to entertain questions so this can be a fluid dialogue. More specifically, the purpose of the meeting is to provide background regarding the county's previous procedures for determining elected official compensation, provide clarity and recommendations on how to proceed, on how to determine elected official compensation, and determine the compensation board's approach to determine, I used determine a lot, I didn't read that. Determine the compensation board's approach on how it would like to proceed with elected official compensation. Typically, the process is consistent with what is done by HR for the other employee groups in the county, but as we now know, that is not what is set forth in statute, and there's some more discretion there. So going back to the October 16th board briefing, which you were not at, the discussion arose from challenge. So in 2024, there were challenges that arose from the compensation study that was being done at that time. There were concerns by elected officials, or there were concerns identified that the comparison across elected officials in different counties was not uniform, which is to be expected, and that's why we typically use job descriptions to compare positions. So these challenges led to dissatisfaction by some elected officials with the compensation information that was provided to the compensation board last year and with the board's decisions. At this time, so this briefing was in October. At the end of September, Commissioner Scar and I were appointed to the interim HR director position, and so we were starting to shepherd the job classification study that Troop was doing and the wage and compensation study that Troop was doing. And so in an effort to try to include elected officials in that process, based on what we had done in the past, Commissioner Scar had sent an email out to elected officials requesting job descriptions. And so then that got kicked to the board briefing and the discussion ensued. So at the board briefing, there were comments raised about whether elected officials should provide job descriptions. There were questions about differing interpretations and what the appropriate process should be. And there were references to the statutory requirements and how to use comparable counties. There was a large lack of clarity and understanding, and this board briefing brought all of this to the surface. And it's the first time I can recall there was a forum where this discussion occurred outside of the compensation board meeting. There was a consensus at the briefing by those that attended, which were the Board of Commissioners and several elected officials, that the process to determine elected official compensation should be unbiased, transparent, and should be centered on the statutes. And at that point, I was assigned, in my role as the interim HR director, to investigate this matter and then bring this before you at a later date.
So the process you're talking about, is it the process of providing job descriptions, or is it more than that?
It's gonna be all, we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
Yep. That's what I need to hear from you today. So to go to the statutes, which is one of your handouts, I pulled out of the statute verbatim the ones that are relative to our discussion today. Within each of these, there are other sections, but they're not relative, in my opinion, or legal counsel's opinion, to this discussion. So under ORS 204.005, the following county officers shall be elected at the primary election or general election as provided in ORS 249008. These county officers are the sheriff, county clerk, county assessor, county treasurer, and the commissioners. Note that the justice of the peace and the DA are not listed here. In 204.112, where it talks about the compensation board, sub 1 states each county governing body shall appoint a county compensation board. As you know, that's been done by the Board of Commissioners for the 3 of you. A county compensation board shall consist of from 3 to 5 members who are knowledgeable in personnel and compensation management. The county compensation board shall, sub 2, the county compensation board shall annually recommend a compensation schedule for the county elected officers mentioned in ORS 204.005, which is the first statute I read. So statute 204.112 states that your purview is to review compensation for the sheriff, clerk, assessor, treasurer, and commissioners, not the justice of the peace or the DA. And in the past, the justice of the peace and the DA have been included in your considerations.
Question. When the word schedule is used, does that, I mean, I'm thinking step and column. What is meant by the word schedule?
That is a good question. I did not ask legal for an interpretation on that. My interpretation would be a table of steps. Currently, I think you're aware, our elected official pay table has it's just one wage. There isn't a schedule, if you will, it's just one.
That's why I was asking.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
last year we didn't have any, from my experience, schedule. Okay, thank you.
Correct, yep.
Thank you.
But that is a good question to have legal answer. Actually, legal is with us. Joel, do you have an offhand response to that?
I think you came about as close as I could. You know, there's not a specific definition for this statute, but I believe some counties do have, you know, similar to how we have steps, they do have a multi-step schedule for elected officials. So I think it could encompass that, but I think it could also cover the, you know, the schedule we have, which is basically one set rate.
Okay, thank you, Joel. So under 204.112, under the county compensation board's authorities, this is a very important paragraph. The county compensation board shall annually review the compensation paid to persons comparably employed by the state of Oregon, local public bodies and private businesses within a labor market deemed appropriate by the board for each elective officer. The county compensation board shall take into account such factors as the number of employees supervised and the size of the budget administered by each elective officer, the duties and responsibilities of each elective officer, and the compensation paid to subordinates and other appointed employees who serve in positions of comparable management responsibility. The county compensation board shall prepare and approve by a majority of vote a recommended compensation schedule for the elected officers and shall submit the recommended compensation schedule to the county governing body, which is the Board of Commissioners. And then lastly, under 204-112, sub 4, notwithstanding the sections I've just stated, the sheriff's salary shall be fixed in an amount which is not less than that for any member of the sheriff's department. Moving on to statute 204. Yes.
Question. In my review of the internet, there was a distinction between an elected and a hired sheriff. Does this mean elected? Is this only referencing elected?
My interpretation of this would be it is only elected because these statutes refer to the 204-005 where it's elected.
Okay, thank you.
But where that could come in is if you determine that you want to compare to that hired or appointed sheriff.
Thank you.
Okay, 204-116, the governing, that's the title, 204-116, sub 1, except as otherwise provided by law, the governing body of each county shall fix the compensation of its own members and of every other county officer, deputy, and employee when the compensation of such individuals is paid by county funds. So basically, this means the board is ultimately the authority for setting salaries, including their own salaries.
Question.
Yes.
I apologize for all
No,
the
no,
questions.
please.
Deputy, are we referring to, we're not referring to a patrol deputy out on the street, right? We're referring to,
I think we are.
oh, we are.
Yeah, I think this is a catch-all category that says the board is establishing, and approving the salaries for basically every county employee.
Got it. Thank you.
And Joel, please, as I'm giving these legal interpretations, if I'm incorrect, please jump in. Okay, 204-126, the compensation of any elective county officer shall remain in effect unless changed with the approval of the county budget committee or tax supervising and conservation commission. So in our case, it's approval of the budget committee. But the next paragraph says, before any change in the compensation of an elective county officer is effective, it must be submitted to and approved by the county budget committee or tax supervising and conservation commission at a regular meeting or at a special meeting called for that purpose. So as I think you're familiar, the compensation board convenes, provides a recommendation to the budget committee convenes, provides a recommendation to the board, and then the board is the ultimate decision maker. Okay, so then for context, as I noted earlier, the justice of the peace and district attorney are not listed in these statutes for the compensation board's purview. There were other statutes for the justice of the peace that apply, and it just, there's other processes that describe pro tem and some other roles. Under the district attorney, this is the only statute that applied to their salary, and it basically points you to the state's district attorney compensation schedule. And then whenever, as the statute states in 8.830, whenever in the judgment of the county court or board of county commissioners, the salaries paid by the state to the district attorney or to any deputy district attorney are not commensurate with the character of the service performed, the county court or board of commissioners, county commissioners, may pay out of the funds of the county such additional amounts as will properly compensate said officers for the service performed. So the district attorney, as you know, is a state employee. The district attorney is paid by the state on a salary schedule that is online. And if the county wants to add to that, we call it a stipend, we can, and we currently are, but it is not within the compensation board's statutory purview. And we'll dig into some recommendations on that, but just starting with the statutory authorities.
Excuse me. The last comment you made, we're currently paying a stipend. but are we not applying the 8.830?
We are,
We are.
yes. Sorry if that wasn't clear. So the district attorney gets a state salary.
Right.
Based on 4 tiers in the state schedule. And the county's past practice has been to add to that
Correct.
in the form of a stipend.
So we are already following this.
The county is, my point is, it's not the compensation board's statutory authority to make a recommendation, but we're going to talk about whether you want to or not later in
Okay,
the meeting.
thank you, thank you.
Okay, other statutory questions? Okay, so back to the memo. Previous procedures. So this is what HR has typically done. And thank you, Mary Jo, for helping fill in a lot of these blanks for me. So Human Resources has typically gathered the information from local county comparators, including elected officials' salary data for department heads and direct appoints, date of last salary increase, assigned and appointed duties, county population, and form of government. Human Resources then develops a report that summarizes how elected officials compare to other counties and recommends compensation increases. Human Resources then convenes the Compensation Board, which reviews the report and determines compensation increases, if any, for each elected official in the upcoming fiscal year. The Compensation Board submits its recommendation to the Budget Committee during the next committee meeting. And then finally, the Budget Committee submits its recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners, my observation is the Board of Commissioners deliberation has generally occurred during the Budget Committee participation, but then the Board of Commissioners officially approves any recommendations for elected official salary changes during the board's adoption of the budget, which is usually in June. Questions on previous procedures? Okay. Mary Jo did some work looking into what other counties do. Generally, compensation boards across the state function similarly, obviously because they're largely based in statute, and they consistently reference statutory authorities. Some counties have charters and bylaws for their compensation board, but these documents, again, largely just restate the statutes or they elaborate on compensation board operating procedures about meeting frequency, how they're going to notice logistics, things like that. Some counties do have elected official job descriptions. Troop compensation studies for elected officials include using job descriptions or job assessment questionnaires to compare them to comparable counties. Private business data has not typically been used, and this is a change in your packet that I want. This is why I provided a new update here. When this bullet was provided to you, I was receiving information from our primary troop contact that's doing our job classification study and wage compensation work. And she was surprised to hear about this concept of using private business data, which is the note that you previously had. We were questioning that further, and so she did follow up with the owner of the company, and that's the revised language that you have. So it is still accurate that private business data has not typically been used, but it may be appropriate to use this data excuse me, when the position compares to a private market position. So again, it's not typical because a lot of our elected official positions it's hard to find the positions that compare to market, but it is an option to consider. Human Resources staff are not aware of other counties using private business data. We have not done an intensive investigation on this, but in the preliminary work that Mary Jo had gathered and looking at what other counties are doing, and again, what Troop typically does, it doesn't seem to be a common practice to use business private data. Okay, the compensation philosophy, which is the resolution, separate document. This resolution was approved by the Board of Commissioners in February. The board affirmed that Tillamook County believes that its employees are the key to delivering excellent county services to residents, businesses, and visitors, and is committed to attracting and retaining employees through fair and equitable pay and benefits. For the purposes of conducting competitive compensation studies, the county defines market as within 5% of the total compensation market average. Total compensation includes salary, the structure midpoint, total employer-paid medical premiums, less employee-paid premiums for the following: medical, dental, vision, retirement, HRA, VEBA contributions, if those are applicable, and the value of paid leave. The county compares to Oregon counties according to ORS 243-746 sub 4 sub E, which states comparable is limited to communities of the same or nearest population range within Oregon. The county also compares to Oregon counties that are comparable to the county in cost of living index, cost of housing, population, and bordering geographic location that the county competes with for talent. So in reviewing those, the last sub 4 and sub 5, it was determined that our comparator entities at this time are Clatsop County, Columbia County, Crook County, Curry County, Hood River, Jefferson, Lincoln, Malheur, Polk, Union, Wasco. And then we also included the city of Tillamook and the state of Oregon. But there's a couple of notes there. So for the city of Tillamook and the state of Oregon, those would not be used for positions that are directors, just because of the type of position wouldn't be comparable. So the director at a city of Tillamook, their level of responsibility would be different typically than a director at the county. So those were determined not to be comparable. Yeah, I think that's all on here. So this compensation philosophy is what Troop is currently using to conduct the compensation study for AFSCME, non-rep, and Teamsters, and that is underway. Then I'm not going to go through this table, but you know, we may be talking about timelines today, so I just want to give you a snapshot of where the job classification study and the compensation and pay equity study are for the 3 employee groups that I just mentioned. Questions on the timelines?
Who conducts the comparator surveys?
That is Troop. So to Human Resources Department recommendations, I'm assuming you wanted these because it's not necessarily my duty to do so, but I can stop here if you don't want to hear the Human Resources. I don't want to overstep what the Compensation Board may be desiring the county to provide, but I'm happy to go through these recommendations if you'd like. Okay, so beginning with the statute, again, the statutory process summary, which is not exclusive. There are other things that you can do. It doesn't say in the statute that you can only do X, Y, Z. Again, kind of getting back to the justice of the peace and the DA, for one example. I will also call attention, the bullets, the far left bullets are different intentionally. The ones that are an arrow are not statutory, but I didn't want to put them at the end and have the flow of the discussion get too convoluted. So the dark bullets are your statutory authority.
One question for you, Luana. I'm thinking about the if you recommend a compensation schedule. I mean, some compensation schedules I'm familiar with sort of are two-tiered, so to speak. There's sort of a placement on a step section. You know, just make up numbers 1 to 30 or something, and then there's sort of longevity. Are you considering some sort of schedule like that, or is it just what's your concept of the schedule?
So today I have no concept of a schedule. that would be, I would want to hear that from you in what you would want to look at, or if you want Troop to come up with what may be best. But there are no recommendations on specific wages or structures or anything like that today. That would be the next step. And so if that is something you wanted HR or Troop to proceed with investigating, I would want to hear that from you today. But we could, absolutely. Okay, so to summarize the statutory process, HR is recommending, consistent with that process, that the compensation board recommend a compensation schedule for the sheriff, clerk, assessor, treasurer, and commissioners. You should consider whether you want to consider a compensation schedule for the district attorney and justice of the peace. Those would be the two outstanding elected officials. You can or you cannot. Just like with all of the other elected officials, all of these are advisory to the budget committee and the board of commissioners. So you could provide a recommendation for the DA and justice of the peace, and the board could consider those recommendations along with the other ones, or they could say, that's not in the comp board's purview, we're gonna do our own process with Troop. If, for example, you didn't proceed with the Troop process or whatever process, but it would be a recommendation, like all the other ones.
Question. What's the current process for recommending or increase or decrease in stipend for, the DA?
It's through the wage study. So, correct, I'm going out on a limb here. I would guess that we would do a comparator survey for the district attorney, and we would look at all of our comparator counties. And then if there was a wage determined, I'm just gonna make up a number. If it was determined to be $15,000, that's a recommended wage. And the salary on the state's website was $14,000, then a recommendation may be for the county to kick in the extra $1,000. Does that sound like a reasonable? And I'm
And how-
guessing that's what's been done in the past? Yeah.
And how frequently does that happen?
So
How frequently is it reviewed? My apologies.
So how frequently it's reviewed is whenever the county has done a complete compensation study, and I think you're familiar with the many starts and stops on that. There was one done 22, is that the last one?
2022, yeah, a smaller one.
Yeah, and then 24, the one that I referenced, that there was just some concern about the data. Yeah, so I would say this is the first time in over a decade where there's been a comprehensive, true market study, start to stop, elected official to AFSCME, including the DA.
So
Thank you.
one of the things that concerns me is I've been through salary studies in the past, and they typically take a very long time. And I'm just thinking from our budget schedule coming up, it seems like there's a lot of things that have to happen before the budget needs to be approved. Is there time to do all this?
So a couple of things. The timing to do the survey should not, well, there's two pieces here. The timing to do the survey itself doesn't take that long. We have comparator surveys going now for AFSCME and non-rep, and they're 2 to 3 weeks. And then there's some analysis, and we're only talking about a handful. Again, I'm just assuming we're doing the true process, not trying to imply that we are. And then there's analysis, and we're only talking about a few positions. So, and Troop already has all of the total compensation factors. So that's not anything new that we would need to gather. So the survey itself is easy, and the analysis should be short. And I built in some timelines here in that table that, you know, maybe I think are realistic and align with elected official compensation recommendations coming along with the timing of when the non-rep recommendations would be made. So from that standpoint, that's pretty straightforward. The part that's gonna take a little bit of time here is, what is that based on? So even if you said today, go do the survey, have Troop do it, there's data that needs to feed into that, which is coming. We're gonna talk about that. But what are those factors? Do we need job descriptions? That's a whole other part of today's discussion. That, I think, is gonna be potentially the time-consuming part, but I still think it falls in line with the recommendations we're gonna be receiving from Troop for the other employee groups. To the budget, as you know, we don't know any of these numbers. And so and we aren't gonna have negotiated contracts, or we will know numbers for AFSCME, but they won't be public because they'll be going through bargaining. And we certainly won't have any data knowledge for non-rep or elected officials before the budget is adopted. So we've, as you know, been kind of operating in a black hole there. So we, in preparing for the budget, we put that 5% in there, which was a bit of a conservative estimate to try to cover across the board COLAs, market adjustments, but we know that's not gonna hit the mark. There could be a 2% COLA and somebody gets a 10% market adjustment. And that 5% is just meant to have something in the budget to try to capture what we know are gonna be increases.
So the idea is to get something in there so we have a budget, but then this will be one of those things that will be reviewed in the quarterly meetings or whatever.
Well, the data would come before you at a specific compensation board meeting. Yeah, which is later in our processes.
Okay.
So to jump to that, to the tables, I have to the table at the top of, I think it's on your page 3, compensation board meeting today. We do the comparator survey in May, full recommendations mid-June. We're looking at the next compensation board meeting at the end of June.
Okay.
Ish. Yeah. Great questions.
Rachel, you mentioned a forum that discussed compensation outside of something. Do we have any summary or access or concerns that would be relevant for us to consider from that?
I don't remember mentioning forum. Say it another way, please.
When we're talking about the October 16 board
Oh,
briefing,
uh-huh.
you mentioned that there were concerns about how the process went, and that you made the comment there was a forum that took place outside of something,
That was the board briefing.
outside of the board briefing.
No, I was referring to the board briefing, which was not, so basically the board briefing, which is a Board of Commissioners meeting, more of an informal one, a roundtable, which I think you've participated in before. We were talking about the compensation board, but the compensation board wasn't there. That was the connection I
Got
was
it.
trying to make, which was unique. Not inappropriate, but
Okay,
unique.
was there any information there that would be helpful or relevant to us now?
I think I've summarized it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've summarized it, but it
Alright.
is recorded if you wanted to listen
Okay.
to it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're on the second or the third bullet. So back to the statutory human resources, back to the Human Resources Department recommendations. This is a statutory bullet. In determining the compensation schedule, the compensation board shall consider compensation paid to persons comparably employed by the state of Oregon, local public bodies, and private businesses within a labor market, keywords, deemed appropriate by the board for each elective officer. This gives you a lot of discretion here to include comparators or not to include comparators. As I stated in the compensation philosophy, our current comparators include the state, city of Tillamook, and 11 counties. Regarding the consideration of private businesses, I don't have a recommendation for you on how to do that or whether we should. It hasn't been a past practice, but I'm happy to entertain how the board may want to proceed with that, and we would proceed accordingly. The second bullet, again, right from the statute, such factors as the number of employees supervised, the size of the budget administered by each elective officer, the duties and responsibilities of each elective officer, and the compensation paid to subordinates and other appointed employees who serve in positions of comparable management responsibility. We have looked at this in our comparator surveys in the past. And again, that's not an exhaustive list. Next, I'm going to continue with this. This document is what we have done in the past. So we refer to this as the AOC table. It's the Association of Oregon Counties table. The Association of Oregon Counties, for many years, completed elected official salary comparisons across the state, as well as for a lot of other positions, directors and managers. So to provide you an option, we could, in lieu of a job description, use this table, which we have updated, which includes the such factors bullets. So if you just followed the statute, did not include private businesses, which you can, if we completed this, it would get you the basic information that you needed, that Troop needed, someone needed, to conduct an analysis, just as a starting point.
Does this, if this table were used, does it include the state of Oregon positions?
This could include any position. So the top of it includes is benefits, which county, what the comparable entity is that's submitting it, and then the list of elected officials and information about those elected officials.
I think my question is, does this, if it's from the Association of Oregon Counties, is it listed, is it comparing counties' job descriptions and pay per county, or job descriptions and pay in state employment?
Just counties. Yeah, this was just for counties.
That's, thank you. Okay.
But we could have the state complete this if you decided the state was a comparable entity.
Okay.
So this is a template for whoever to use for whatever entity. So it builds in all of those factors, elected, appointed, size of budget, FTEs, highest subordinate salary, et cetera. And then at the bottom, it lists the non-elected management positions of Tillamook County. So what the positions listed there are all of the positions on the executive service pay table, which would be the closest from a management perspective comparable county positions. So when we populated this for each of our elected officials, we would complete that data. If we provided this to one of our comparable counties, if they don't have a juvenile director, they wouldn't complete that information. But they may have a comparable position that they would add down under other. So this is a template as a starting point. So this is what HR has typically used for, well, not the last couple of years, but have in the past when AOC was administering the survey, HR relied on this information.
Question. Do we currently have position descriptions for all elected officials?
We have none.
We have not.
That was the issue that arose at the board briefing, is that it was requested. And there was a lot of resistance on that because in part, a lot of it is in statute. But what we do run into is we have several elected officials who do other things as well. Some of them are appointed duties, assigned duties. Some of them are appointed by board order. But there may be other duties as well. And so in an effort to where HR was coming from and trying to create job descriptions to have a true comparison with other counties, was we want people to be paid what they should be paid. And if we don't know all of the things that they're doing, we didn't feel like we could do a good job at that. And so there, there's a couple of ways that we can get the duty, we can work through that. I think this format would be the minimum. And so at minimum, elected officials are required by statute to do certain things. So if you're looking at elected official A in one county, it generally should be the same as elected official minimum requirements in another county. But what we don't want to miss is where there's differences in our elected official is doing more or maybe less, and how that compares.
Is there a way that, if we look at this AOC survey, is there a way that we can be alerted to key differences in position descriptions?
Yes, and that's where we've started with those green boxes. You can see some of the differences with duties. So like the tax collector. So the tax collector in our county is the assessor, and that's appointed by board order. It's not in statute. In other counties, the treasurer is the tax collector. So these boxes would be checked differently for each county. It is not an exhaustive list of other duties, which is why there's blanks there for other people for survey respondents to complete those.
So you said that maybe some of the elected officials resisted the idea of job descriptions. Couldn't you expand on that as to why?
I may let them speak later
Okay.
about that, but my recollection was it was largely because their jobs are in statute.
Right.
Yeah. And we've never had them, so that's new. But there are other counties that do have them.
So is it a lot of counties, just a few counties?
I don't know. Do you know, Mary Jo? No. I just know in some of the work that Mary Jo had done in looking at this, we did receive some. So we know it's not unrealistic to expect the job description.
And the sheriffs I've talked to, very, very few had job descriptions.
Yeah, it would seem like it wouldn't be very,
I can tell you that I was one of the people that resisted it because a lot of my job is in statute,
Right.
and it is a tremendous amount of work to create this job description. And to what do you gain? And the idea is that you can utilize that to compare to other counties. Well, if the counties that we're comparing to equally don't have job descriptions, then we've just wasted a gall of time creating this job description that we have nothing to compare it to. So I think you could probably gain as much just simply interviewing the elected officials and getting a scope of their work. That's why, if the group decides that that's what we're doing, then I'm going to do it because that's the way it is. But if I have the opportunity to voice my opinion, that's my opinion.
Great.
I have a question about Sheriff, are there other appointed duties that you have in our small county that maybe another county sheriff doesn't have? Like, I wouldn't want to miss a duty that you are doing that it's not in statute.
Every single sheriff's office is slightly different. Hood River is one of our comparator counties. They have a community corrections division that they oversee, but they contract with Norcor for jail, so they don't oversee a jail. But I also think they actually oversee their dispatch center. I don't oversee dispatch center here, but I have community corrections and a jail. There's other places that don't have community corrections, but they do have a jail and they have a patrol division, so every sheriff's office is slightly different. And if it's not a jail, then it's community corrections. If it's not community corrections, it's dispatch. If it's, there's a lot of different setups, but it really kind of all centers around the same thing, I guess you could say. I don't think that the office of sheriff compares to any private sectors in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't compare to chiefs of police because there's no jail, there's no community corrections, no dispatch. But every sheriff's office is slightly different. Hood River's, like I said, a very close one. They have community corrections, they've got a patrol division, but they do not oversee jail because they use Norcor.
Don't you oversee the marine rescue and the search and rescue?
Yeah, in every sheriff's office by statute, again, it's in statute, is required to have a search and rescue.
Got it. Okay.
Every one of the 36 sheriff's offices has a search and rescue out of statutory requirement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those are listed in the green the green boxes that we would check for our sheriff.
Okay.
I mean, we can discuss it. My inclination is, the job description doesn't seem to be something I'm feeling excited about. And the other thing, is I don't see using a private sector in any case in this situation would be appropriate. I just think it's apples and oranges. So that would be my 2 cents for those two things right now.
Okay. Do you want me?
My view is that I'm familiar with job descriptions for the sheriff and the people, and so I'm a proponent of job descriptions, mainly for the reason that if we have something unique in Tillamook County, I would want to be able to consider that in the salary. You know, I wouldn't want to miss it if our people are doing more than per se, because I looked up the salaries in other counties in the state of Oregon, and some of them are pretty low. I mean, I was astounded. So personally, I'd like to see job descriptions, and I would definitely like to see us use this county survey schedule for our data. And I do agree, private data doesn't, would not help me.
And to be clear, I think we can use this table and still highlight the differences.
Yeah, I would suggest, that
Yeah.
rather than like job description, is if there's extra stuff, like
Yep.
you were saying that's over and above sort of the
Yep.
normal thing, I think you could identify those without a job description.
Yep. And the table is structured, it already has some of those differences in it that have been in the past AOC survey, and so we would add to that. We didn't,
Yeah, it seems like the job description would just be like this overly broad regurgitation of what
Yeah.
we already do.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I just want to say, I don't want to speak for my fellow elected officials. They all have, I don't know everything that the assessor does, everything the county clerk does. Again, my opinion is my opinion alone, and that's why I give it for my position.
Right.
And again, if it was decided to go the other way, then, you know.
Well, right, and if other people want to have job descriptions, we'll listen to that too, but what do you think?
Yeah, while traditionally I'm a big fan of job descriptions, I think what's important to this discussion is that we understand the differences that we're comparing apples to apples and understand the key differences between what's happening by statute and what extra duties have been assigned or incurred.
Just for clarification, for my purposes, if the information we get back from the survey for any of the elected positions, would that then become a reference item that we could look at for the salary schedule?
absolutely.
So it basically is quote unquote, using that term loosely, in lieu of a job description. Would that be
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Okay,
And
okay, then I'm comfortable with that.
And to clarify the compensation process that we're doing with Troop, Troop is based on all of our updated job descriptions. They are conducting a total compensation study with our comparator entities. They are providing recommendations, not considering the county's budget, on structure changes, job families, and where wages should be. Period. That's a data point. What we have not had in the past is that snapshot in time where we have unbiased data saying this is what the recommendations are to change or adjust salaries. So everybody's going to see that. Then we need to decide how we're going to implement it. So you would first see, if you request we do this work, you would see that initial data along with all of the other data probably as well, and then figure out what is the salary going to be. Yeah. Okay, so just a couple more bullets under the recommendations, and then we can talk about how you want to move forward. So HR would recommend that Troop conducts the compensation study consistent with the current study that's underway for AFSCME, Teamsters, and non-represented employees. That doesn't necessarily have to include the job descriptions, but just from the seeking compensation comparables, from our comparator counties, that's recommended. The compensation board shall prepare and approve a recommended compensation schedule and submit it to the Board of Commissioners for recommendation, or recommend it to the Board of Commissioners for consideration. And then the board would approve the compensation after the budget committee's approval and set the salaries. So there's some future consideration and next meeting sections that we're going to talk about, but I'd like to just stay with the recommendations and have you deliberate and provide clear recommendations if that is coming to HR and Troop, because you have the purview to decide however you want to proceed with this process. So I'm hearing we're not interested in doing the job descriptions. We're supportive of the AOC table. And did I hear that you were supportive of proceeding with Troop?
That would be my recommendation.
Okay, no private data, no private business data. And then the compensation philosophy specifically says that the city of Tillamook and the state of Oregon are not used. So again, the state of Oregon directors, they're just a different level than our,
That wouldn't include state of Oregon.
okay, so we would use our 11 comparator counties.
And, you know, some of those counties, I think it's gonna, maybe, hopefully it'll average out. Some of those counties are, you know, like, housing is really very much more expensive here than some of these other counties. So I'm hoping that averages out.
That was considered in the selection of these counties, yeah.
What about the city of Tillamook? What do you think about that?
I mean, it doesn't hurt to have that information in there. I don't know that it's necessary.
Yeah. Doesn't-
I'd say it's not necessary. I
doesn't-
don't
doesn't
see a
feel real-
county.
Doesn't feel real comparable.
Right, right, I would agree.
So let's just use the counties.
Okay. Any other guidance to HR? Is there anything I missed, Mary Jo, in what the compensation board should be? Oh, the justice of the peace and the DA. Would you like them as part of this consideration? If it's not included, I would recommend to the Board of Commissioners that it's included in the troop work with the same recommendations that you just provided with
would seem-
using the AOC table and not using private data.
That would seem logical.
Okay, so I will just include that in this.
May I ask another question?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm sitting back here, keep raising my hand. The statute mentions size of budget, number of staff supervised. Is that information that you would like? And if so, how would you like it? Would you like us to get that to HR? Would HR pull that information?
Isn't that part of what they're going
That,
to?
yeah, that would be
That
part
is
of
part
this.
of it.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
Thank you.
So how we're actually gonna do that, we haven't got that far yet. I didn't want to be presumptuous, so I'm, yeah.
And I think that Sheriff Brown has the right idea. I think that would all go in a job description as well. And it will be part of the process, so.
Okay. Well, that was pretty straightforward. Anything else on what we have talked about thus far?
I'm still in a bit of a quandary about this concept of schedule.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, please.
And I think what I'm hearing from Michael is, I'm familiar with step and column. I'm familiar with step and column for middle managers. And so, and I know that, elected might be a little bit different, but in some, so I'm just wondering, when you collect this data, is it possible to get other county information? Do they have step and column for these elected positions?
I don't know, but that is data that would be collected. And if it is your desire to establish more of a schedule with steps instead of a compensation table with one salary that is what it is until you change it, which is reviewed every year, we could.
I
we could-
see.
Yeah.
All right, okay, all right. That's why I was asking for clarification.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in making more work for us
Yeah,
by any stretch.
I don't know about that whole thing. Is it,
So-
but I would be interested maybe if what other people are doing.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But I don't know if I want to go
Right.
building matrices.
Yeah, it is a little bit different because they're on an elected term.
Right, it's different.
Yeah.
It- I
Well,
don't-
And it is reviewed annually.
Right, and yeah, I'm comfortable with that. The word schedule is very
Yeah.
confusing. Um,
I can try to.
It
get
does
additional
look like-
clarification.
It's a different one.
Yes, please.
I don't care. There's some other elected officials maybe online if you want to have any comments or others.
I see
you have anything?
one.
Going back previously to the job description, thank you for deciding not to do that, because if you're gonna elect an assessor in Tillamook County, you're gonna elect that same job in all the other 36 counties. They all do the same thing. Where it varies is the departments that you oversee. So Multnomah might oversee part of the clerks. Tillamook County oversees tax collection. It's a whole different department. But a lot of other assessors are just assessors and have no idea about tax collection.
Right.
If you roll, they turn it over. So that's really the key difference is what additional
Right.
departments am I appointed to oversee?
Yeah, and that's what we want to
So
get
thank
to.
you.
Yeah.
Want to make sure, yes.
Someone online?
Yeah, Aubrey, did you have any comments? District Attorney?
I was trying to turn my camera on, but I don't know what was happening. It wasn't turning on. Sorry for that. At this time, I don't. I want to be really clear what is going to be wanted or needed from me. I'm happy to work with Troop. But I would mirror what Ms. Larson said about our, I think that was Ms. Larson talking. Sorry, I just saw a little person in the, on my screen, but, as far as, there's 36 of us and we all have the same jobs per statute. And my role is established by the Constitution, and further defined by statute. So I guess I would just want more clarification if you guys decide to review my stipend, if you will. I'm happy to help out with whatever I need, getting data, helping to get data from other counties and things like that. I know it's a hot topic among other DAs, so I'm very interested in how that will go with those conversations. So I'm happy to be included or provide anything that I need to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else got a raised hand there?
I have a follow-up question. Rachel, you said, I think that part of this study will include looking at what the electeds are paid compared to other people in their departments, managers?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, per
Is
the,
that what they're
per the
currently
statute.
paid or what their top step is?
This would be their current salary.
Hmm.
Which is where everybody's gonna be, with the exception of what changes might be in the next couple of months, everybody should, there's gonna be no adjustments. Cause all of the compensation changes for everyone should be occurring at the same time. Is the goal.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how it's all gonna shake out, but that's the initial strategy. So I think, so what wasn't in here is actually how we're gonna do this. So if I could make a recommendation in how to complete this table is Mary Jo and I would just take a final look at it, make sure all the pieces are on here, and then we would work with the individual elected officials to populate it, or maybe in the interest of time, we just take a first stab at populating it and then reviewing it with them. And then once it gets to a place where it's determined to be accurate, we would share it with Troop. Okay. Moving on in the memo, under future considerations, one thing that did come up at the October board briefing was in the statute under 204.112, where it describes the compensation of the compensation board, or the makeup of the compensation board, it says that it's comprised of 3 to 5 members who are knowledgeable in personnel and compensation management. So this was talked about at the board briefing, that we have 3, and I think you're aware that it's been difficult to fill these seats as it is, and so we've just had longstanding lay members on the budget committee serve in this role. We have advertised for it. We haven't had good response, and so we've done what I just mentioned. There was some ideas floated at the October board briefing about actively seeking out individuals in the community who are knowledgeable in personnel and compensation management. So the HR director of company A, for example, to add to this group. Or maybe over time, they comprise the 3, because it doesn't have to be the 3 lay members from the budget committee. So we don't have to talk about that today if you don't want to, but just did want to flag it as something that came up. And then additionally, some compensation boards do have bylaws. I don't know if that's helpful. I think it could be helpful, just in the amount of time it took me to do the research on this and to find how we have not been doing things necessarily as we should have been. I could see it's helpful, but my memo is always here to refer to, so it may be a value. I don't think it has to be lengthy, but it may be a value if you wanted to entertain that in the future.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about bullet point 1, but bullet point 2, I think would be a good idea.
Okay. We could come up with, would you like to see a draft of that at some point in the future?
I mean, I don't think you have to do it right for this year or anything, but yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then the next meeting, kind of hit on this, it would be pending the results of the comparator survey, which I would expect sometime late May, mid-June, along with our other conversations that we're going to be having. At that time, the agenda would include the compensation recommendation from Troop for you to consider, and then it is customary and appropriate to hear all the past increases. I've seen the reports going way back and what elected officials received every year, so you could see the trend of increases. So that data would be provided at that time. And then I would convene the budget committee immediately following, so decisions could be made going forward. Okay, anything else at that future meeting that you may want to discuss that we haven't mentioned?
I can't think of anything.
Okay.
Doesn't mean something will come up the second I walk out, but.
Okay, well, you know where I am. Okay, where Mary Jo is. Okay, that is all I have for you today.
Okay. So, so we don't know approximately when, like, middle of May or?
Yeah, I would say late May, mid-June, late May, late June.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
depending on, we also have a lot of vacations that we're juggling and troops capacity to complete the work, but I think late June at the latest, and all of that is in line with our other surveys that we're doing. Because it would be nice for you to know, although there's no way you're not going to know because you're on the budget committee, and but you'll know what's going on with the rest of the county. Yeah.
Okay,
We need to make a motion to adjourn.
let's do that.
I move to adjourn compensation board meeting.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thanks for keeping me in line.